Okay, good morning, everyone. It is 9 a.m., so we're going to go ahead and get started with the meeting. Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the last SEOW quarterly meeting of 2022. My name is Laura Johnston, and I'm a Policy Research Associate on the State Community Partnerships Workgroup. I'm from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, along with the State Epidemiologic Outcomes Workgroup team. So we hope everyone's having a great week so far. To start off the meeting, we're going to introduce our speakers and have a quick overview of the agenda. So if we could just bring up the agenda here. Okay. So we'll start off with a welcome and overview of the Hawaii Strategic Prevention Framework Partnership for Success project, the State Epidemiologic Outcomes Workgroup, and the State Community Partnerships Workgroup. We're also excited to have Carrie Benes and Karen Kahikina from the Department of Transportation present on using the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's Fatality and Injury Reporting System tool, or FIRST. Carrie is the Highway Safety Manager for the Department of Transportation. She's been working in the field of traffic safety since 2007, and she continues to work on identifying ways to incorporate a safe system for all road users. We also have Karen with us. Karen is a highway safety specialist with the Hawaii Department of Transportation's Highway Safety Section. Since joining the Hawaii Department of Transportation in 2007, she's worked in the areas of speed management, traffic records, and drug driving. She currently manages the impaired driving and traffic records program areas, as well as the drug recognition expert and standardized field sobriety testing programs for the state. This presentation will be followed by a brief Q&A and then a 10-minute break. And after the break, we'll have Candace Pang, the Executive Director for the Salvation Army Family Treatment Services, and she'll present on the Salvation Army Family Treatment Services and data-informed pregnant and parenting women's treatment. Candace has worked for the past 26 years in helping mothers in early recovery from substance use and trauma, along with her keiki, whose well-being has also been impacted by substance use, violence, and mental health issues within the family. Candace has served in various positions at Family Treatment Services, including as outreach and outpatient substance abuse counselor, therapeutic nursery program manager, and therapist and clinical director. Most recently, as the executive director, she oversees all program services, fiscal operations, community partnerships, and workforce development, while maintaining and advocating for effective women's treatment and the integration of infant mental health and family engagement services. Candace serves as the secretary for the Association of Infant Mental Health Hawaii and is also a board member for the Hawaii Substance Abuse Coalition. Then again, we'll have our brief Q&A and then followed by closing remarks. Okay, so let's begin with an overview of the Hawaii Strategic Prevention Framework Partnerships for Success. There we go. The SEOW is a part of the Hawaii Strategic Prevention Framework Partnership for Success, or SPF-PFS, which is a federal grant funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA. So the purpose of the SPF-PFS is to strengthen and enhance Hawaii's prevention system to promote well-being and reduce the impacts of underage drinking among persons aged 9 to 20 in Hawaii's communities. The SEOW is a partnership between the Department of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Division, University of Hawaii, and interested community stakeholders. The SEOW has been providing epidemiologic services to ADAD since 2006, and the SEOW collects, analyzes, and reports substance use incidents and prevalence, as well as provides technical assistance and training for state and community stakeholders. The SEOW comprises of researchers, epidemiologists, data managers, and other professionals involved in research, data collection, and utilization pertaining to underage drinking and substance use. For the SEOW core team produces the Hawaii State Epidemiologic Profile for Alcohol and Drugs using the latest available data from diverse data sources to profile the current substance use situation locally. We also conduct quarterly meetings where individuals and organizations have the opportunity to share their substance use related data. As part of the SPF-BFS, the State Community Partnerships Workgroup, or SEPW, supports academic and community partnerships that increase the capacity of the substance abuse prevention system to address local needs. The SEPW achieves this by conducting applied research which addresses alcohol use among high-risk populations. The SEPW supports the goals of the Hawaii Strategic Prevention Framework Partnerships for Success. Okay, so that is a quick background on the SPF-BFS project, SEOW, and SEPW. Okay, and there are just a few reminders we want to go over before getting started. So we're using the Zoom webinar format, which may look a little different from the Zoom meetings format that you may be used to. Attendees are muted and videos are off, so presenters and hosts are not able to see attendees, and attendees also cannot see themselves. So if you have questions, please send them through the Q&A feature located at the bottom middle of your Zoom window. And you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to submit your questions or comments. So please send them in at any time and we'll review them at the end of the presentation. If you would like to wait until the larger discussion at the end to send in your questions or comments, that's totally fine too. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Carrie and Karen.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for having us. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yes, you're able to share.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead and do that. All right. So today's presentation, I have myself, I'm Carrie Bennis. I'm with the Hawaii Department of Transportation, and I'm the Highway Safety Manager along with Karen Kahikina. She's our Highway Safety Specialist. You probably know, some of you are probably familiar with us in the realm of traffic safety. And our purpose for today is to help equip you guys with some data resources that are publicly available and you can use at your disposal at any time. I know that especially during legislative session, sometimes data requests could get lost in the fray of things. And so hopefully this will serve as a learning experience as well as a possible tools you can tap into in the event you have questions and would like to do some preliminary research. So today's objectives is to introduce you to NHTSA's FIRST and DOH data and run through some examples. And then we're going to go ahead and get an understanding of data limitations, and then also just to see how SEOW would possibly plan on using data. I will toggle back and forth just so that I don't stall up too much time. For the first website within NHTSA, I'm going to go to that and also show that there's actually a plethora of data options that you can explore. But the one that we're going to run through first is called Fatality and Injury Reporting Systems Tool, or FIRST. And so this will guide you through a process of querying FARS data. So just to be clear, FARS data is collected by each state. So you can do a comparison of different states like Hawaii to Arizona or California or whatever state you would like to do. It is as we go through it, you'll see that there are some differences in the way terminology is used, but just know that this is a free data set and anybody can use this. Just to go over the top, a lot of times when you want to think of the lens you are using in terms of crash data, you want to ask yourself, are you looking at the total number of fatal crashes? Are you looking at the vehicles, which would involve different information about a vehicle or the types of vehicles that are involved in crash? Are you looking at from a person perspective? Or are you looking at it from a driver's perspective? Or are you looking at it from the occupants that are in a vehicle, including the driver? Or are you looking at it from a more vulnerable road users perspective, which would be pedestrians, or my least favorite word is petacyclists, but it is also known as your bicyclists. So that gives you actually more queryable data on the perspective of someone riding a bike, or if somebody's walking. But for this example, we're going to use drivers, because drivers are, tend to be the most, carry the most responsibility on our roadways. They are driving things that require a license, and they are required to follow the rules. And when it comes to impairment from drugs and or alcohol, this is definitely where you may find some of the issues. But you can do different things with this, but it's good to select drivers involved in fatal crashes, so that would count all of those that are both driving that survived or did not survive a crash. You can go from different perspectives, but I advise that whichever one you do choose to pick, it's good to state that, and if you're using a title slide, you want to say drivers involved in fatal crashes versus just crashes, because then the numerator may change. It's good to check your time frame, understand that the data is the most consistent in the last 5 years. You go beyond that and you may run into some more data discrepancies. It's good to pick your region, like we could pick Hawaii, and we'll go ahead and do that. And then you can filter your selection if you want to run a simple query, or if you want to select different types of vehicles, you can. But I usually prefer to build my own report. This is the SEOW group, I feel like you guys may enjoy looking at your own data the way you want to. So that's definitely fine. And you can just, pick your X and Y axis here. For instance, I will pick, this is of drivers in Hawaii from the past 5 years. Let's say involving, a pedestrian. Let's see if it will allow me to do that. Involving a pedestrian. And I think there's also a blood alcohol. Let's see, or involving, let's just say involving. So this will be driver with highest PAC. So we'll go ahead and push submit. It's pretty quick, but it will give you the breakdown of the different BACs. So this is a driver. You wouldn't have to necessarily pick pedestrian, but I just, feel that our vulnerable road users sometimes tend to be impacted by those that are driving impaired. So you get an idea of a 5-year time frame, how many of those involved a pedestrian, how many of them did not, and their total, and as well as the different grade of blood alcohol that was noted for their system. Again, there are these special notes here down on the corner. It's good to look at those so you have that for your information so you can get an idea of if it's an estimate versus actual. And with that, that's an example of the first system. Of course, I encourage anybody that likes data to just play around with the system to see how it works best for them. You can also request raw data downloads. I will give a caveat. They will send them to you or point you in the right direction to them, but it takes a lot of decoding. So you basically have to go in and code all of the data elements that you're looking for. But this makes it a lot easier. And also on the first page, I'm going to go back to the original page here. We also do have a visualization tool, which does include doesn't include impairment yet. It's supposed to, but we do at least have speeding, and there are elements of impairment that are involved in there. So you can get an idea of what it looks like to, we have basically a short data dashboard. If you want to just exclude a state or look at several states, and it'll give you the rundown of the different types of crashes that involve speeding, the amount, and then you have how many are in the daytime, nighttime, roadway function, crash type, driver, pedestrian, and then you can also include alcohol as another factor as well. So this gives you an idea of some of the tools that are out there on a national side. The downside to NHTSA's data or FAR's data is it does have a little bit of a lag time. We have to finalize data to send up there, so it could take, it almost has it's like 18 months, I want to say, before the next, like 2021 will be available, usually like February, March of 2023. Now I'm just plugging to the next site, which is actually our DOT site. So if you want a little bit more current data, it doesn't have as in-depth analysis as FAR's, but it does give you just an idea of the different regions and where they sit as far as primary contributing factors. Primary contributing factors is not all contributing factors, but it does give us some information. So for example, in this data, the great thing about this is like you zoom in to, let's say, Big Island, you'll notice that your primary factors actually change when you change the area. So you understand that drugs and alcohol definitely do pop out as primary contributing factors that are noted on the Big Island. And you could even go even a little closer, like if you wanted to look in the Kona region, you could get information that definitely teases out this little section of the map would tell you that yes, alcohol and drugs are definitely an issue as a primary contributing factor that's noted here. Some things that are just, they're just not as noted just because sometimes the information isn't available on the police report, which is given to you in the very primary summary before you log on to this page. But you can also select your primary contributing factor as well. And you can also select the entire county if you'd like, types of vehicles that are involved. We started adding scooter, which is, we'll probably be adding other vehicle types as we know that different modes of transportation are emerging in the state. Let's see. Other than that, again, you could go back to this this, as far as FARS data, you can download any of these or use any of the data tools, but they also, that there is an option for you to download raw data if you wish to do your own analysis. This does not have that feature, but we just recommend that if you're looking for raw data download, that you would look at the FARS data.
My turn, Carrie? Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Carrie, did you want me to move on? Okay. I'm thinking maybe Carrie might have cut out, but so Carrie showed you some of the data sources and data tools that we have, but we do want to caution, there are data limitations, and we have to understand the data limitations, because we primarily look at the FARS data, the Fatality Analysis Reporting System. Like Carrie said, it's about 18 months delayed. And so it's not always timely data. We also use our State of Hawaii Advanced Crash Analysis, or SHACA crash data. HDOT houses the crash repository with all law enforcement completing major crash reports, and those crash reports go to into SHACA. That SHACA is a fairly new system that has been, I guess, years in the making, but prior to that, we had the Traffic Accident Reporting System, TARS, which was a standalone system that was very archaic, and data could only be input into the system either CD or manual entry. But now we have SHACA, which has direct interfaces with the police departments. But that being said, SHACA, oh, Carrie, do you have the PowerPoint?
Yes, sorry about that.
So SHACA and FARS do have their limitations. We don't have all the data that we need to paint an accurate picture when it comes to traffic safety. And we need to be careful not to take like the data at face value. For example, we don't have access to all adjudication information. So we don't know all the time what happens at the end of a case after it goes to court, or even the results of those court cases. We also have limited toxicology data, just because of numerous reasons. For example, maybe a person refuses, so then we don't have the tox for that. Or if somebody blows like a 0.08, so there is no real incentive for a police officer to test beyond alcohol. So then in our data sources or databases, it'll look like we have primarily alcohol issues when it could be a polysubstance issue. And then another example would be limited traveling speeds data. So we have data on like what speed limits are. We have the data on maybe how fast a fatal crash, what the primary contributing factor could be speed, but on a day-to-day basis, we don't really know how fast people are traveling on a roadway. We're trying to correct those, and we are doing it like in some of the counties, but just realize that there are those data limitations. Repeat offender data might be an issue too, because of personal identifiers and again the adjudication data. For example, we funded a project where they looked at repeat offender data, and they looked at FARS and SHACA data, and tried to access other data sources, but people back then were not very comfortable with sharing their data. So taking what they could get, basically they told us we don't have an impaired driving problem in Hawaii, or we don't have a repeat offender problem in Hawaii. And we're like, well, that's not true. But when we looked at it, that project showed us that we had so many data gaps that we need to address. And then there are new modes and policies that might not necessarily be reflected in data collection and the forms. For example, electric bikes are not currently captured in Shaka and in the crash report forms. So we have our Hawaii Traffic Records Coordinating Committee that discusses these things, and we try to, we meet with police departments, our HDOT traffic safety branch, and a lot of different stakeholders, maybe some of you in this meeting or this group. And we talk about some of these issues and how to work around these or work with it. Maybe set long-term goals, but in the meantime, have shorter goals so that we can at least capture some of that information. Like I mentioned, data sharing is an issue too. It's improved over the years, but each of our systems have their limitations. Like I mentioned, as up until a few years ago, our crash reporting database was really archaic. I know a lot of our other databases that we access are archaic as well. So it's, you know, there's the data sharing where people don't want to share, and then there's the integration where our systems can't talk to each other. And that's even among the different computer systems, the records management systems. So let's see. And then with the personal identifiers and lack of funding and resources. For impaired driving, there is no central repository for all data. The closest might be the AG's database, but I believe it only includes arrestable crimes, so it wouldn't include administrative driver's license revocation cases. And I'm not sure if we could track repeat or habitual offenders in that database because we currently don't have access to that database. And then also data entry into the databases may not be at 100%, which leads me to collection of data. So basically garbage in, garbage out. The databases and the data are only as good as what we put into them. Incomplete data leads to inaccurate problem identification, strategies, action plans, and evaluations. For example, FARS is lacking in drug driving data, and they're trying to improve that. But as you know, with government, it takes a while for things to happen. So we try to keep track of our own data. We have our own toxicology tracking data, but you know, even that is limited because there are a lot of refusals. So we don't have all the toxicology, or we don't know what people are always on. And then also with testing, there's a standard drug panel, and if there are any designer drugs or anything that might not be captured in the panel, it might not show up in the tox reports. Our crash reports may not be capturing all major crashes because the threshold is left to the discretion of the law enforcement officer. And so if a police officer shows up at the scene and they're like, oh yeah, no, that's not $3,000 worth of property damage, you might not get a major crash report. You might get a minor one. But like I said, these are issues that the TRCC, the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee, is discussing so that we can come up with solutions. So I'm not trying to be totally negative about like, oh, we have all these data limitations and we can't get anything done, but just know that we are working on it, and we want to also get your guys' input to see how maybe we can address some of these data limitations and data gaps. So I think I saw a couple of questions. Okay. I think Rick had asked, would you please provide the website for the HDOT site? Carrie, can you drop that? Did you drop that in the chat?
I can.
Okay. Is there a way to collect data on non-fatal alcohol impaired crashes for the state and our nation? We have the Shaka, our crash repository right now, but it doesn't include tox results. So it's suspected impairment, but if someone blows like a 0.08 or above at the police station, they may include it, but if they fill out the form prior to them being there, it might not go back into the Shaka system. And okay, sorry. How is death data acquired? The police departments are required to do an investigation on the crash and then submit the report to our FARS analyst who's in our office. He also gets the death certificates from DOH and the tox results from the medical examiner's office. Okay. And I think, Rick, is it possible to find the % of repeat offenders of DUI arrests and or crashes? Like I said, that's a little difficult because we don't have access to all the databases, and we were part of an impaired driving. It was a National Governors Association's Impaired Driving Learning Collaborative. And so there were 6 key stakeholders that were part of this group from Hawaii. And one of the things that we discussed that could be more easily done is maybe having one central person, maybe like a Dan Galanis from DOH, who can you know, enact some MOUs with different agencies, and we come up with a unique identifier for the reports or for the cases so that he can map out or link the data. But other than that, I don't know if there's a way right now. Okay. Carrie, did you have the PowerPoint?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess the question is, and you could use the chat since I know some folks are enabled, but it would be good to know as how can traffic or crash data help, and what are some priorities in using HDOT data and especially for this group. So if you have any thoughts, just it'd be helpful for us to know. So it helps us hone in on what to prioritize. I think we're running to the 9:35 mark soon. So yeah, with that, any thoughts or comments? Just yeah, like to hear those.
One of the things that we need to work on is we're trying to establish a state lab, or at least a statewide lab within Hawaii. And hopefully if we have a state lab, testing for different substances won't be as expensive. So, you know, at first we're looking at DOH, and if a law enforcement officer has submitted for a toxicology results, then they would probably run like a standard panel, but they could also look for other things as well. That was the issue when we were trying to pass a bill to expand the definition of drug within our OVII statute beyond just controlled substances. Legislators had asked, what about non-controlled substances? You know, where, you know, how often is that happening in tox results? And we can answer that because we weren't testing for it. It costs money. It costs a lot of money to test. So why test for something that wasn't going to go to court? But if we have a state lab, then hopefully we'll be capturing polysubstance.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie. And I also just a really favorite of you, if I'm interested in maybe specifically looking something like younger, like college age.
Sorry, Lara, you're cutting off on my end.
Hi, Carrie. We can still see your screen. Wasn't sure if you meant to share, to continue to share your screen. We do have comments from Rick in the chat, as well as a comment from Michael Phillips in the chat. With for Michael, he said that polysubstance use would be of interest.
And like what Karen was saying, FAR's data has some of that information, and I think, you know, we will continue to advocate for the improvement of data. But in terms of, like I recommended, you can download the raw data sets and code your own if you'd like. It is challenging. So just because we're not sure what, polysubstance can be like at 0.01 and anything, or and there are different types of substances out there. So there's about 1,000 drugs out there that need to be coded.
From our own toxicology tracking chart or spreadsheet that we've been keeping, and with our preliminary state data with our fatal crashes, we've been seeing more drug impaired driving, actually more than alcohol, and actually polysubstance if you consider alcohol and drugs. And then in our toxicology tracking spreadsheet, people are on a lot of different drugs. Our police officers or DREs are trained to recognize or opine on drug categories. So not necessarily specific drugs, but drug categories. And like in recent years, they've seen like 2, 3, 4, I think up to like 5 or 6 different drug categories. So they can have multiple stimulants, but the drug categories are like stimulants, depressants, hallucinogens, inhalants, cannabis, and so to see multiple drug categories, that's really alarming. Delta 9 THC testing as things move closer to a federal move toward cannabis. Yeah, so we're testing for Delta 9. One of the issues too is testing for the other, like Delta 8 or Delta 11, Delta 10. You know, the panels might not be capturing those because they're not specifically looking for Delta 8, you know. So if a law enforcement officer pulls someone over, they do a DRE evaluation on them and they opine that that person is on the drug category cannabis, they don't know that it's specifically Delta 8 until they get a tox result. But if a tox result comes back and says it's negative or there was no presence of cannabis, you know, that doesn't mean that there was no cannabis. It could have been Delta 8, or maybe the cutoff levels were low or high. You know, there could be multiple reasons. But for them to send it back to the labs and test for Delta 8, that costs them more money too. So it is a concern if the federal government removes it from the schedule. Luckily, our OVUII statute was changed. Was that a couple of years ago, Carrie, already? I think it was a couple of years ago where we changed the definition of drug so that if anyone is impaired on any substance, they can be prosecuted. Because prior to that, it had to be on the controlled substance list, or it didn't have to be, but that's what prosecutors were kind of leaning towards, or they relied on it.
And to the question relating to the BAC levels, that's the FARS data, as I demonstrated, does have that. So that website that was listed on the PowerPoint, it's https cdan.dot.gov/, and that first will let you query the different BAC levels. You have all the different cutoffs, as you mentioned, and it isn't 0.08, but it goes to 0.0799. It's not, and then the next one would be 0.08 and above. So you can query that for the past, I think it's, now that the data has changed, I think it's to 2012, which is pretty, that's a solid number of years. So you will be able to identify drivers that were involved in a crash that were tested. Keep in mind tested, like not all drivers are tested in crashes. It has, sadly, we've moved away from that. Yes, the slide should be shared with you. I did send it to the group, which may be forwarded out, so you can just click on the link and that comes out. And similar with Laura's question about the age groups, that same website I just mentioned, you can actually customize your age group to the age groups that you would like to look at and compare those across the board.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie and Karen. That was really helpful and a great presentation. Do we have any other questions before we move on? You can go ahead and type them in the Q&A or in the chat. And yeah, really helpful for us as SEOW to look at those age groups. Yeah, great resources and tools. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, if there's no other questions at this time, we'll go ahead and take our time. Okay, welcome back, everyone. All right, we're about to begin the second half of our quarterly meeting. So please join me in welcoming Candace Payne.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Before you spend most of our time looking at my PowerPoint, I just wanted to show my face for a little bit. I can't see any of your faces, and normally I really like to be able to see who I'm talking to and everything. So these formats are always a little strange to me. But I wanted to just start off by saying I'm very grateful to be able to provide some information about family treatment services at Salvation Army, and to be able to share a little bit of what we've been learning about data and how that informs the practices that we have here serving families. And I'm just going to have to say, after listening to Carrie and to Karen and to see all of the wonderful resources and data collection that they've been able to do, I was feeling quite nervous, actually. I started to get nervous because I thought, well, you know, we are clinicians at heart here at Salvation Army. And so our level of data collection is going to look very elementary compared to some of the things I think that you might normally see in your work groups. So I hope that you will remember that as we're looking through some of the data that I'll be presenting today. And I want to talk about our programs too, because I realize that maybe some of you are not as familiar with family treatment services. So before I get started, I just wanted to say in a larger scope that family treatment services is really about helping women who have a substance use disorder be able to achieve their recovery goals. And we do that through our continuum of services that we offer. One of the things that I usually get asked the most is, you know, well, what is Salvation Army Family Treatment? I thought that it was really about thrift stores and Thanksgiving and disaster relief and all of those good things. And a lot of folks may not realize actually that we have clinical treatment programming as well. So family treatment services is one focused on women and families. Addiction treatment services located in Nu'uanu area, Wakanaka, tends to focus on men and have special expertise in working with incarceration, men leaving incarceration. We have a program on the Big Island called Family Intervention Services, which focuses working on adolescents. They have residential programs there. And so I just want to put that out there just as some additional to share about our additional Salvation Army family members. But let me share about us. So I'm going to be sharing my screen in a moment. I did want to share that, you know, our continuum has been around for about 40 years. We started in about the mid-'80s, and it really was built from some of my predecessors, pretty smart predecessors, who saw that there was obviously a difference when they were working between men and women in their alcohol and substance use treatment programs. They started to see that women had different patterns of initiation of their alcohol and drug use, different motivators to come into treatment, and also different obstacles that they struggled with while they were trying to seek help. So the continuum has been built over the years, initially from some of those first, you know, glimpses that there's a difference and we need to do something differently for women and their children and their families. But we started working and understanding some of the more national data that came from SAMHSA. So we do use SAMHSA quite a bit, Center on Substance Abuse Treatment, and their model of working with women and children who are trying to find recovery. And from that level of information, we really started to look around at what our clients were telling us, what our fellow providers who are also working with our families were telling us about some of the issues and some of the strengths of the people that we were working with. And so I'm hopeful that a lot of where we are today is really more so about what Hawaii has informed us, what our island people have informed us about what's best practices, as well as taking some of the national data and using that to better serve our clients and to have best practices, basically. So now you can stop looking at me. And I don't know if it was, if there's a issue for everybody, or if this is just me. I'm going to turn off my video because I do find that sometimes that lags. So sorry, I'll see you at the ending. Okay. Okay, and by all means, please let me know if something is not working right on my side. But here is a little glimpse of what some of our continuum of services might look like. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each program and then get more into the data and what we've been finding at each of those different junctures of services for our clients. The programs that most people often think about when they think of Salvation Army, and if they are aware of our substance use treatment programs, is Women's Way. And I often will get folks that will say, oh, Women's Way is all of Salvation Army's programs, right? And I'm like, well, actually, Women's Way is just one part of all of the services that we provide. But I'm very happy if they want to call us Women's Way, because it is our residential, the only residential treatment program in Hawaii that has that level of intensity, where you can bring your infant with you into treatment and where your child and your family can also receive therapeutic services. So at this level of care, I have a few notes on here that you can see. We have 24 plus hours of treatment activities per week, and these are just a little sampling of some of the activities that we provide. And it's all within a 24/7 therapeutic milieu. So what does that mean? That means that everything that they're learning in their classes about communication, about problem solving, conflict resolution, managing uncomfortable emotions, all the things they're learning about relapse prevention and alcohol and drug education, all of those things become part of the residential environment. That's the place where they're practicing. So it's not like you go to class and you come back to your room and you don't have to worry about anything anymore. Every involvement that they have at a residential treatment level is really about a chance to help grow the skills that they've been learning in other areas of our programming. So women that enter this level of care struggle with stopping their alcohol and drug use on their own, unless they are in a structured environment to help them along. So priority for Women's Way is to give spaces to pregnant women. And often we do have pregnant women who come and they give birth while they're in Women's Way. And we also have women who enter treatment with an infant or young toddler, and then they might be reunited with their child while they're in treatment. So the activities that you kind of can see here, that many of them are focused on concepts and things that are larger than just stopping the alcohol and drug use, right? It's really a full comprehensive package of services that they are experiencing while they're in Women's Way. Whenever we talk about treatment for women, we look at what's really the important things that are a part of their life. And the importance of relationships, particularly that with their children, is one of the motivators for coming into treatment or for seeking help. So we have the Infant Mental Health and Family Services Program, which includes things like parent coaching, parenting education. We do developmental screenings with the children. We also provide a space for unification and visitation. And it's all done in an environment that is supposed to mirror home, right? It's supposed to mirror a fun place, a comfortable space to be able to practice perhaps some new parenting interventions, to be able to talk to partners, to family members, work on reunification types of skills with each other. So one of the things that we hear the most from moms when they are trying to come into treatment and what motivates them and what I hear all the time actually is things like, you know, I don't want anyone taking my children away from me. I want to be a healthy mom for my baby. I don't want my baby living on the beach. You know, so those are the things that are emotionally driving women to try and get help. The issue oftentimes are the stigma and the barriers, right, to be able to access some of those services. But that desire, that hope, that dream to be able to be a healthy mother and to love and care for their children, that's real and that's there. So we always have to keep that in the forefront of our minds. Yeah. The family roles, particularly that of being a mom, is a strong motivator for wanting to stop that use. But again, that fear of separation from their child and the stigma, those were the obstacles in getting help. But what we find is that if women knew that there were programs out there where they could bring their children into treatment, that their families could get therapy, that their partners could be involved in couples counseling and also receive services, then we noticed that women were more likely to get that help, right? right? So that's how important having this particular part of our programming be part of the larger program of substance use treatment for women and children. Okay, not all of our programs are residential or housing. Some of our programs are actually more for outpatient and community-based care. So outpatient is a standalone treatment program, but we also have clients that transition from Women's Way residential treatment, and they continue on in early recovery through our outpatient program. So if you're not too familiar with outpatient treatment, there are typically different levels of care, and you transition from more intensive levels of care like day treatment, intensive outpatient, continuing care. The intensity level decreases, and that's very purposeful because we want people to be able to practice some of the things they're learning in a structured setting and be able to experience what are those challenges when they're really out there in the community. So we have outpatient. Most of the women, again, will have transitioned from Women's Way residential and enter outpatient, but you can also be assessed for just needing outpatient treatment. So different ways of entering into the recovery programs. Our other community-based program is called Family Recovery Support Services. It's an outreach program, and it includes intensive case management. It is generally for clients that have completed residential treatment, and as they transition to the next levels of care, then they can have a case manager that's there to help support them with housing, employment, parenting, all balancing all of those many challenging parts of just living life, as well as being in early recovery at the same time. So the case manager can also work with clients that have not actually completed residential treatment. So sometimes we do have clients that, against the advice of the program, decide that they don't need or they don't want the structure of residential treatment, so they leave us, but the case manager can continue to work with them in the community and continue to help them in meeting what their identified recovery goals may be. So two different ways that caseworker can work with people. To help clients that might not want or need the high structure of Women's Way, we also have Kiolopono, which is our therapeutic living program. We actually have 2 housing programs. So again, just as a brief overview, we have Women's Way residential treatment. We also have Women's Way outpatient treatment. We have infant mental health services that encompasses everything. We have an outreach program, which is the Family Recovery Service. And then we have 2 housing programs. Kiolopono is considered therapeutic living. It's sort of a in between the high level of residential treatment and then more of your maybe like a transitional home or even your independent housing. It's that some people say it's a step down. I don't like to call it that. It's not a step down. It's just that the structure is not as intense as it would be for a residential program. So women don't have to come from residential treatment in order to make use of Kiolopono. And actually, we do have clients that finish maybe an outpatient program or they're in an outpatient treatment program, but they continue to need that type of supportive living environment. So Kiolopono might match perfectly for that particular need. What we do find, though, in working with families over the years and why Kiolopono was developed in the first place was that we would have women transition to outpatient treatment and return home pretty quickly from leaving residential treatment. And what we found was that, women weren't coming back to outpatient, or they weren't completing, or they were struggling and there were relapses happening and so forth. And so Kiolopono grew out of that data, if you want to call it that, of what we had seen with our clients, and what clients were informing us was the real struggle. It was too soon to go back to home. There wasn't enough of a sober support network or practice on how to deal with life's stressors. It came too suddenly. And so that's really where a lot of the struggles happened. So Kiolopono is that medium ground. It offers a little bit of extra time, a little extra support, but because it's less structure, less programming, they have an opportunity to practice more on the outside. So this is usually a good option for many women living residential. And then the last housing program that we have is Ka'ohuho o Manoa. I didn't mention this earlier, but our family treatment services is primarily held in Kaimiki. This particular program of ours is located in Manoa, hence the name, of course, probably figured that out. But it's a transitional housing program for women. And at this level of care, it's really the least structured, right? These are the clients who are almost ready to be out there in independent living, but they just need a little bit more time. So this works really well for clients that perhaps have finished residential treatment, they're on the tail ends of their outpatient treatment, and now they're getting ready to look for employment. They're ready to work on their housing subsidies and find housing on their own, or back with family that they've had time to slowly rebuild and heal some of those relationships again. So women can enter anywhere is appropriate for their needs within the continuum. Although I have to say, most of the women that we see and that complete and have longer term recovery are those that actually go through that whole continuum that I just talked about, from Women's Way residential to outpatient while living at Keolapono and into Ka'ohuho'o Manoa and working. So that's part of our goals. Our vision is to have strong wahine, healthy ohana, and thriving keiki. I don't know how familiar you might be with some of our substance use programs here in Hawaii, but there are actually only 5 providers across our state of substance use treatment that focuses on pregnant and parenting women. One is on Oahu, that's us at Salvation Army. We have partners on Hawaii Island, and that would be BISAC. We have a partner on Maui, Malama Family Recovery Center. And we also have partners on Molokai and Kauai. But out of the 5 providers that work with PPW, that's what we call pregnant and parenting women, only 4 are actually providers of some form of residential supportive housing or sober living where you can bring your child with you into treatment. So when all is said and done, we're really looking at 17% of all substance use providers in the state that have that level of skill and care services to be able to work with parents who are wanting to make sure that their children are safe with them and that their children get that help. So it's our belief that when women have programs that allow them to maintain their relationships with their children, their partners, their family, and they have the comprehensive services in place that can help the whole family system, then they are more successful at reaching their goals. Having children living with the moms in treatment and supportive housing programs is one step, but there are other elements of gender responsive treatment that needs to be included, such as helping a woman with growing feelings of self-confidence and self-worth, managing co-occurring mental health disorders, practicing and building healthy relationships, attending to one's physical health, including family planning, managing trauma symptoms, and all of those things on top of learning about substance use and preventing relapse and all of those important things. Those all take time. So, when we're talking about substance use treatment for women, we're really, again, talking more than just stopping the alcohol or the drug use. It's a full, comprehensive, complex set of needs that women and their families are needing. And I just want to put this out there, and this is a group that understands this, but alcohol, substance use disorders, these are symptoms of something that's deeper that's going on for the individual. And so treatment needs to be comprehensive in order to figure out what were the deeper injuries that happened that led to the alcohol and substance use. Here's just a little bit of some of the data. So here we go. Here's the beginning of some of our bean counting that we do here at Salvation Army. This is our fiscal data from 2022 of some of our Women's Way admissions. And I just pulled several items that I thought that might be of interest. We actually collect a lot more than this on all of our clients entering programs. I thought you might be interested in knowing that a majority of our admissions do begin at Women's Way, so Women's Way residential treatment. But we also have clients that enter family treatment services for the first time by just needing us for our housing, like our Manoa program, and also our outpatient programming. So those are the points of entry. As for identification of one's ethnic culture, 44% of women identified as Native Hawaiian, 31% were Caucasian, and 11% identified as Asian. What was interesting to me was looking at our children's numbers. This is probably some of the higher percentages, but 74% of our children that are involved in our programs were Native Hawaiian. So what does that tell us about, right? That tells us that we're going to be working with families and partners, daddies, that come from a Native Hawaiian background. So again, this is all just data, but what do you do with it? And how is that going to impact your programming, right? Housing, most of our clients who come into treatment do not have stable housing prior to entering. In fact, 61% were homeless. 19% came from a structured environment like incarceration, and 7% had more temporary housing situations. When we looked at employment, 42% who entered our programming were not in the labor force, but 27% were looking for employment. And just a little quick step away from this data, COVID, of course, had a huge impact on this. And we saw that particularly at our Manoa home, where most of the women there, they were pretty successful at being able to find employment once they were living at that housing program. And when COVID hit, all of those ladies were put on furlough or they lost their jobs. And even though now everything is opening back up and there's lots of employment opportunities, what we're finding is that our families are still struggling with finding childcare, because now childcare has been a little bit more restricted or more difficult to access over time. So it's still a major issue from admission as well as all the way through and looking at our outcomes data. The severity of the substance use disorder. So a quick thing to say about that. What we find in a typical year is that some clients will be assessed and not need residential treatment, that high level of care, but they could benefit from outpatient treatment. All applicants go through a comprehensive assessment process that includes an addiction severity index, Beck's anxiety and depression scales. We look at trauma symptoms, and it's all to determine if they have a substance use disorder and what level of care would be most appropriate for them. So when we looked back at fiscal year 22, what we found was that less clients were found appropriate for outpatient, and more clients had a high severity level of a substance use disorder, which meant they needed residential treatment. And I think you probably hear that in the community, right? Higher mental health needs, more severe issues with alcohol and substance use. And then referrals, 43% of I get this question asked a lot, like, how do women find you? And so 43% of admissions were self-referrals, 21% were from criminal justice, 10% from other substance use providers, and 9% came from child welfare services. As I was listening to our previous presenters and of course the focus of SEOW with alcohol use, I did want to share that a majority of our clients are polysubstance use. I think we said that earlier. Polysubstance use, however, when they're being assessed, the primary substance use that often women will report is still methamphetamine. The secondary substance is typically alcohol. So again, you can't pull those things apart, right? So methamphetamine might be the primary drug of use, but alcohol is right there with it. And the thing that I noticed this past year in particular, which again matches with a lot of the more society data, is that alcohol as a primary substance use actually jumped up. So we were at 17%. So for example, 70% of our clients reported that methamphetamine was their primary drug of use. Alcohol had 17%. It's actually a little higher than what we normally see. We usually see high numbers of methamphetamine. This is the first time I'm beginning to see alcohol use as a primary begin to pop up there. So what can this data tell us? Where does this data fit in relation to prior years? That's an important thing for us to look at, particularly because COVID really threw off all of our data, all of the patterns that we had been tracking over the past decade. You could see the differences happening over the last 3 years. And then what other questions do we need to ask in all of this? So before we do that, I want to share a few more snapshots of our clients. So as you know, we're a continuum. So the program numbers that you see, Women's Way, Outpatient, Kiolopono, those are duplicate numbers, right? Because most women will go through multiple programs. Unduplicated counts, we served 104 unduplicated admissions of women across all programs. We served 27 unduplicated admissions for children across all the programs, and 29 plus family partners that were engaged in family and couples counseling. And that little plus there is because we did not do an adequate job of making sure that our counts were not duplicated. And so, we are in constant learning on how to do correct data collection and to make sure that what we are presenting is accurate information. So I didn't want to give you duplicated counts. So for sure, 29 plus, guarantee you it was more than that. But 29 for sure is unduplicated. So Women's Way residential treatment, over the last 3 years, we took an average. So that's pretty much your COVID pandemic timeframe. We served 56 women and 28 babies or toddlers. Compared to previous years, compared to prior COVID time, that is half the number of women that we actually served. And there are 2 reasons for that. One, that COVID did impact clients coming into treatment, for one thing. But 2, we had a major shift in our funding in 2019. And it led to us having to close a cottage that was available for women's residential level treatment. So we are serving half. We only have space for half of the women that we were able to serve in 2019. Partial funding, partial COVID. Outpatient treatment wise, we actually doubled. On average, we serve 65 women per year. We doubled since 2017. Again, to give it some context, the reason for that is because we did a big shift in 2017. We actually started to admit women that did not necessarily have children or did not necessarily were able to bring children into treatment with them. So we had more single women that started to access and use our outpatient treatment because it was gender responsive. It was only women that they were in their therapy groups. Kilopono, therapeutic living, we had 34 women and 24 children on average, and that actually remained relatively constant pre-COVID as well as during COVID. And then Ka'ohuho o Manoa, our transitional housing program, we had 46 women and 12 children on average. And this saw a lot of fluctuation. So we doubled the number of women that we served from 2017. And again, remember 2017 is when we started to admit women who didn't have children. So we saw more single women entering our program. But what we also noticed was that we started to see less women with children entering the transitional housing program. Compared to 2019. So compared to numbers prior to COVID, we started to see a shift into families coming in for our transitional housing. We're hypothesizing that part of that is all related to the fact that we had less women entering treatment to begin with, that it was a scary time during COVID, a lot of uncertainty. So women were fearful of coming in, and children, there was also a lot of fear about bringing children into residential or housing, community housing environments because of the risk factor of increasing their exposure to COVID. Okay. So data-informed development, this isn't just about collecting numbers, it's about asking the right questions, identifying the most appropriate ways to collect the info that we need, and analyzing those findings, and then asking more questions. And I think that's the one thing that you'll hear from me constantly is that we just have lots of questions that we've been asking over this time. We believe that offering a continuum of recovery support for pregnant and parenting women and their children will lead to better engagement and long-term recovery. That's our belief. So we ask this question to ourselves: does a continuum of services for pregnant and parenting women where they can bring their child with them into treatment help to increase engagement, right? We thought, oh, simple enough question, right? So how we thought we would address that question is that we thought we would look at clients that completed programming successfully. I do that with air quotes, and client elopements, or clients that left the program against program advice. And we looked at length of participation in treatment, how they were referred, and whether or not they participated in more than one FTS program within the continuum. And this is what we found. We found that families who successfully engaged in recovery participated in either a combination of our supportive housing program and outpatient treatment, or They participated in residential level of treatment and transitioned to the other parts of the FTS continuum, which could have been a combo of housing or an outpatient program. We also found that clients that only participated in outpatient treatment and no supportive housing did not stay engaged. This is the same for clients that only utilized housing and didn't engage in treatment. So that is what we initially found, right? That didn't answer fully our question. So we had more questions. Was there a delay in reunification of children in treatment for those that left prematurely? Could that have been a reason why some women left early, because they didn't actually have their children with them in treatment yet? What was the actual motivating factor for women seeking help? And if you tracked what that motivating factor was, would that have shown a difference between completions and those that left prematurely? Comparing those that went to residential versus those that only did housing plus an outpatient programming, which one did better? Which one had higher completion rates? Who had the longer term outcomes by participating in those two different levels of care? Were those that completed their treatment doing better at 6 months post-discharge or even 12 months post-discharge? In what areas were these individuals who completed doing better? What areas of their life were they doing better? And for those that left prematurely, how many returned for services or went to other providers? How are they doing post-discharge? So at the ending of all of this, we had more questions to ask in order to dive further into the data collection and process evaluation. I wanted to share with you something that we were very fortunate to have been a part of. We were fortunate to receive a SAMHSA Pregnant and Parenting Women grant from 2017 to 2022. We did this, Salvation Army took the lead in that particular grant application. We partnered with Malama Family Recovery Center on Maui, and we also partnered with the University of Hawaii Social Science Research Institute. And what it did for us was actually provide us with a wider view of the importance of data collection. And it gave us a wealth of technical assistance and opportunity to grow in our skills in that area. I think each one of us really valued data, but as I said, we're kind of doing bean counting and we're doing a lot of, definitely not rigorous of what you would do at University of Hawaii's Social Science Research Institute, but we were trying to do our best in managing data and applying it to improve the quality of the services we offered. But with the SAMHSA grant, it really opened our eyes to something further. And it also allowed us to do the very beginnings of Hawaii data on how we as substance use providers were doing in addressing the needs of Hawaii families when it came to moms who had a substance use disorder. So I'd like to share with you, I won't go through all of this, but I just want to share with you one of the processes that we went through. We developed a program evaluation blueprint, and we had several goals that we had identified as a project. I'm sharing with you goal number 4, which was to improve the mental health of mothers. We started with a general idea or a general observation that a lot of our women who are entering our treatment program appear to have either some type of other co-occurring mental health diagnosis. Before we started data collection, it was more so just counselors that were like, yeah, a large population, they seem to be having depression or anxiety, or a lot of clients are reporting symptoms of PTSD. And so a lot of it was just collected, that kind of information. We wanted to find out more, okay, first of all, do we have a lot of women that are having co-occurring mental health disorders actually come into our program? And more importantly, what we do, is that improving their outcomes? So we started to do some literature reviews, and from the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, they had one particular program that suggested the treatment which addresses the full range of women's needs is associated with increased abstinence and improvement in other measures of recovery, including parenting skills and overall emotional health. Interventions that focused on managing PTSD PTSD symptoms, while also creating a space for mother-infant bonding, reduces substance use cravings and risk of continuing perinatal substance use. So it was very important to us, and we saw it obviously, that you need to address both the mental health of the mothers as well as address the substance use disorder. What we found at the ending of the project was that we had a very strong 65, a little bit more than that, but 65% of our pregnant parenting women population did report a co-occurring mental health diagnosis. So we got that information by doing this evaluation process. We had evaluation questions, we had indicators that we wanted to measure, specific outcomes. We had programming that we hypothesized would be part of addressing mental health needs for women. So we had that listed. We had tools, part of our assessment tools, to be able to actually track how women did from intake to discharge. We had who was going to be responsible for it, and then what the data collection times were going to be. Slight little side discussion here. You know, you might be wondering, well, what about the like, why is the mental health of the mothers important? As you can see how it's tied with the substance use. But it wasn't only about addressing her mental health to strengthen her recovery from substance use. It was really about the impact this would have on the mental health of her children. Again, we're always thinking about the next generation, right? So if you have a mother whose mental health needs are being taken care of, and she's and those things are being managed, and she's successful and healthy with those other aspects of her life, then what you're doing is you're breaking that multi-generational adverse childhood experiences, and you're breaking that cycle of substance use and trauma for the whole family moving forward. So this was an important one for us to focus on. And I realize my time is beginning to slowly run away. So let me share with you just a few slides that talk about what we collected in looking at goal number 4, which is improving women's mental health. We asked questions at intake at 6 months while they were in our programming, and then at discharge. And the two questions when it came to depression are kind of simple, right? But it's when they were asked, are you feeling depressed at all? 33% women at intake said, nah, I'm not feeling depressed at all. But what that meant was that 67% women were feeling some symptoms of depression, right? So we wanted to see this percentage grow. We wanted to see more women at discharge not have any feelings of depression. And we saw that. We saw that from intake, 6 months, and discharge, that percentage started to grow. We also saw on the other side, women that reported feeling depressed every day at intake was 13%. But at 6 months, that number dropped to 5%. And at discharge, it dropped down to 3% of the women were reporting feeling depressed every day. So we saw an 80% decrease in feelings of depression from intake to discharge. And that was pretty significant. We were all like, wow, we knew that we could see it, we could describe it, but to be able to see it in these numbers was just, it was just proving that what we were seeing was really happening. The same thing happened with anxiety symptoms, right? They were asked the question, are you feeling anxious at all? 29% said that they were. That meant that 71% that they were not, sorry, which means 71% were saying yes, they were having symptoms of anxiety. But at 6 months, it went to 50%. And at discharge, 67% of women said that they were not experiencing any feelings of anxiety. Likewise, again, you look on the other side, when asked, are you feeling anxious every day? 18% said they were. That dropped quickly to 5% at 6 months and 3 months at discharge. So that's an 84% decrease in feeling anxious from intake to discharge. One other question or assessment tool that we used, again, these are all just simply through self-report. I can go further about tying it into, you know, more scales and that sort of thing, but just asking the simple questions to women upon entry, in the middle, and at the end, we're able to see some of these responses. So in this one, we're looking at trauma symptoms, and it's going to be a little confusing looking. We had major discussions going on between our process evaluation group and our clinical team to try and figure out, like, what do these numbers mean? In general, though, you know, you can see the decrease in symptoms from intake to 6 months. Trauma symptoms, things like negative thoughts, avoidance, hypervigilance, feeling numb or detached. Those are some of the key markers of trauma. But then we observed some interesting things happening at discharge when it came to an individual's experience with trauma symptoms, right? We started to see, for example, there's a bump up in negative thoughts, the yellow bars, right? Negative thoughts, 56% said yes at intake. It dropped to 48% while in treatment. But at discharge, it actually bumped up to 58% had negative thoughts at discharge. So when I first saw that statistic, I was like, oh my God, what's going on? You know, what are we doing? What is this data is telling us? And our evaluator said, the data it's not good or bad. You can't assign it that. It's telling us something. So what do we need to further ask? What's happening just at discharge for that slight bump up in negative thoughts and vigilance? Could it be related to change? Could it be related to transition and fears and concerns about this next stage of their recovery and of their life? So these were the kinds of discussions that came up quite a bit in our evaluation and our clinical teams. We had more questions. So I think, in addition to asking more questions to understand what the data meant and how to address it, we wondered which parts of our programming had the biggest impact in helping women with their anxiety, depression, or trauma. Out of this list here, this is between Family Treatment Services and Malama Family Recovery. We have listed some of our interventions that we use to address the high number of co-occurring mental health conditions that were being reported by our families, by our women. And you might notice that some of the practices in here are actually culturally based, and there's also some Western evidence-based practices here too. So, within an understanding that 74% of our keiki are coming from Native Hawaiian families, we just felt it was crucial for us to integrate Native Hawaiian values and practices and traditions across all of our programs. And that the Native Hawaiian culture really resonated, it resonated perfectly with women's treatment, because what we see that the women were telling us, and they were women from many different cultures, was that there was similarity when it came to valuing family, when it came to valuing their children, their role as a mother and their identity in the family, and then their connection to something greater. So for us, you didn't have to be Native Hawaiian in order to embrace some of these it was a deeper level of understanding the concepts and the core values behind that. And at least from what the women were telling us, again, who came from many different cultures, that this really resonated for them. So we're at our second opportunity with SAMHSA. We actually were awarded again for another 5 years. So we just got awarded in September, yay, to be another SAMHSA PPW grantee. And we're going to further explore, what parts of our programming are making the most impact. How do we collect data in a culturally appropriate way? And we're continuing to learn and to share, when it comes to serving pregnant and parenting women with substance use disorders. And so many questions. It's like peeling an onion, right? It just one thing leads to another question and to another question. And that's really where we're at when it comes to data collection and informing us on how we're doing. So with that, I went a little over. I can certainly open it for questions, but my information is listed here. If you want to just email me or call me, I'm more than happy to entertain any discussion after this. And if there are questions, I didn't look through chat or the Q&A while I've been talking. Let's see if I can pull it up now, if there is anything. I don't think there is. Oh, okay. Michael, does the Salvation Army have any plans to expand services on Kauai in the future? So services, when it comes to substance use treatment programming, that isn't in the plans right now. Kauai does, Salvation Army has a ministries piece and a community response piece. And then Salvation Army also has more of the clinical programming and treatment portion of what we do. I know that on Kauai, we do have community-based ministries services that are there that go through the cores. But as for a treatment program, we do not have one there. And I believe that Kauai does provide PPW services, pregnant and parenting women services, but I think that they no longer have their their housing related program, where women could bring children with them into the housing program while still working on their substance use treatment. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that is what it currently is. Right now, ISAC, Malama Family Recovery, Maui, and ourselves are the only ones where you could bring your children with you into supportive housing or a residential level treatment program. Okay, I will drop my information. I'm just typing in my email. And if you didn't have questions, that must mean I answered everything. Oh, Michael, that only went to you. Sorry, I need to change that. Oh, thank you, Michael. Okay. And hopefully I will be able to hear from some of you. If you have any other questions, just let me know directly. Okay, Laura.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Candice, for that presentation and just for your awesome work in the community as well. Yeah, if there's any other questions or comments for Candice, feel free to contact her. Thanks, Candice, for your information. Oh, we have one more question in the chat as well that just popped up.
Second, I'm sorry, I was muted. Are there instances in which a woman who wants treatment is going through a custody disagreement? If so, do the courts try to let the mom still have their child there because it helps with treatment? Okay, so she does need to be able to have, or is it default to the father? So who actually has custody or jurisdiction? If it's child welfare services with the jurisdiction, we actually work with them quite a bit on, it is ultimately their decision and the judge's decision, but family drug court is usually very willing to work on having a child reunify with their parent in treatment. You know, it just depends on the circumstances of what's going on. And also, to be honest, it depends on who is fighting on the other side for them too, right? Whether it's child welfare services or their own attorneys. Sometimes if a child is not able to live with their mother in treatment, that's where the Infant Mental Health and Family Services Department comes into play, right? So maybe it's not best for the child to actually live with the mother in treatment. Maybe she or he has a relationship with the father, and the father perhaps could provide more of that stability. Then we wouldn't want to disrupt that for the child. You know, we would want to be able to work with everybody involved and see if there could be visitations, again, based on the appropriate time and what the child might need emotionally too. That's really important for us. You know, I get, when I used to do more of our direct work in our therapeutic nursery, I would get many angry grandparents saying like, why are we ripping our grandbaby out to live with mom? because they've seen the wreckage of what's happened, right? They've been through the life of mom in and out of treatment or her active drug use and the chaos and all of the craziness of that. So of course, they're being very protective of the children. So a lot of the work of the Infant Mental Health Center, a lot of work of the substance use counselors and family therapists is really to get to a place where everybody can begin allowing, again, at a pace that's good for the child and a pace that makes sense for the family, to be able to work on either reunification or visitation. But we really try and be very careful about the pacing of all of that. I don't know if that answered your question, Nicole. I hope that did. Okay.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Candice. And okay, so we're gonna move on to our closing remarks. We just have a few things to mention here. And thank you so much to all of our speakers here today. Our next meeting is not scheduled yet, but we'll keep you informed for upcoming 2023 meeting dates. And for more information, you can always visit our website, which will also be posted in the chat. We're currently working on updating our website as well. So hopefully by January 2023, we'll have updates to our website. And we also have our email address posted there. So if you have any comments or questions, or if you know anyone who you think might be a good speaker for our meetings, please let us know. And we'd like to ask everyone to fill out a brief survey post-webinar. It'll pop up once you exit the Zoom room. We greatly appreciate your feedback on the meeting. And that concludes our SEOW quarterly meeting for November 2022. So please stay safe, everyone. We'll see you back in 2023. And we hope everyone has a good day. Thank you, everyone, for joining in.